Welcome once again from Cooperstown, New York, site of the National Baseball Hall of Fame and Museum, and also headquarters for our latest virtual program. Today, it's Virtual Voices of the Game. We're very glad to have with us Lindsay Berra, granddaughter of the beloved Hall of Famer Yogi Berra. We're going to talk to Lindsay about Yogi's legacy, the new United States postage stamp that just came out. We'll talk about Lindsay's career and also her involvement as a member of the board of directors at the Yogi Berra Museum and Learning Center. Before we get to Lindsay, we do want to take care of some business. Primarily, that is thanking our sponsor, the Ford Motor Company. They have generously supported these Virtual Voices of the Game programs. Also, all of our other programs, our Curator Spotlights, our Legends events, all the different programs that we have been doing now for about the last 16 months. Hard to believe we've been doing these that long, but we'll continue to do them throughout 2021. So we do thank the Ford Motor Company. And we do thank our guest joining us today. Her name, Lindsay Berra. Lindsay, as I said, is the granddaughter of Hall of Famer Yogi Berra, graduate of the University of North Carolina. An impressive resume. Lindsay has worked at ESPN, the magazine, and MLB.com, among other places. Now works as a freelance journalist and is very much involved with our new initiative, the Hall of Fame Connections YouTube program, in which she hosts with Carlos Pena of the MLB Network. Lindsay, it's a real pleasure and honor to have you on the program. Welcome. How you doing?
I'm great. Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for having me.
Let's begin before we get into the stamp and get into your grandfather's legacy. I want to talk a little bit about your career. I was doing some research and some reading earlier in the week. You went to a very fine school, University of North Carolina, and you did star on the softball team, batting .333, according to the records that I found. Tell us a little bit more about your softball days at UNC.
So I don't know. I definitely wasn't a star. I didn't have that many at bats for that .333. I walked on to a Division I softball team, which was a kind of unheard of back then. I have no idea if that's something that people do now. I grew up in New Jersey, and people didn't necessarily recruit college softball from the Northeast back then. It was more kids from Arizona and Florida, people who got to play year-round softball. So I just got into Carolina with the intention of going to journalism school and decided to walk on there, and actually didn't tell anyone in my family that I was going to do that. And I'd been a pretty good, I was like a all-state softball player here in New Jersey in high school. And I went and I did this walk-on tryout for like 10 days. And I remember calling my dad and saying, "Hey, Pop, I'm going to play softball." And he said, "Oh, that's nice. They have an intramural team." I'm like, "No, Dad." He said, "Oh, they have a club team. Do you get to go to other schools?" I said, "Dad, it's not a club team. I tried out for the varsity team and I made it." And he, let out a bunch of expletives and really kind of didn't believe me. But it was cool. I actually played just 2 of the 4 years that I was there at University of North Carolina, and I did not play my 3rd year because I made an attempt to try out for the U.S. Olympic hockey team for 1998 and got through their regional selections, and then ended up not going further than that. But that was also a cool experience. So ice hockey and softball were my 2 sports growing up.
I have to ask you, did you carry on the family legacy as a catcher?
I caught a little bit as a young kid because I was proficient at it, and then had to do it a little bit in middle school and high school when they needed help back there. But I was definitely much happier as an outfielder. I was a center fielder through high school.
How about in hockey? What position you play there?
Mostly left wing. I was a winger growing up, and then I played with boys back as a kid. There were no girl hockey teams. I missed that by about 15 years. And as I got to high school, when the boys had kind of hit their growth spurts, a very smart coach moved me from the right wing to the left wing because I was a right shot, and that puts your stick kind of more in the slot and you can shoot and get out of dodge without getting schmoffled as often. So I played left wing through high school and college, and I played men's club hockey at UNC as well.
Really? Mm-hmm. So would you say you were better at hockey than softball and baseball?
No, probably about the same. Pretty good. I was a pretty good soccer player too.
Oh, okay. Very good. Now, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe your first job out of college was ESPN, the magazine. Tell us about that.
That was really just an amazing experience. I started at ESPN in October of 99, the summer after I graduated college. And I worked there for 13 years, covering mostly ice hockey and tennis. But I did 3 Olympics, Torino, Beijing, and Vancouver. It was just a great place to work. You could basically pitch any story on anything. So I had the opportunity to cover a lot of baseball. I did a lot of boxing because I liked it. I did a story on roller derby. I did a bunch of golf stories. Anything that I was interested, I could pitch, and they would say yay or nay. And back then, in the 2000s, magazines had nice ad budgets, and which translated to good travel budgets. So you could go, chasing stories kind of anywhere you wanted to go. So I did that for 13 years, and then I left in 2012 to join MLB.com and MLB Network. My job there was basically to report feature stories for the website and then go on TV and talk about them. And I did that for 5 years. And then in 2018, as all the media companies kind of started to go through their layoffs, I was part of a round of layoffs at MLB Network. And I've been straight up freelance since then, doing a lot for Men's Health and Sports Business Journal, and a lot more in the health and fitness space, some content for some supplement companies. I'm working on a new biomechanics pitching app with the former MLB pitching coach, Tom House. So that's really cool. It's this AI driven pitching app for kids. I'm hosting the new Hall of Fame Connections show with Carlos Pena. I think we have another episode of that dropping today. Might be up already, so definitely check that out. What else do I have going? I'm hosting a podcast right now called Food of the Gods, which is about how elite athletes eat and train to fuel performance. So that's pretty fun. Just a lot of different random stuff at the moment.
Very good. Let's go back to ESPN, the magazine, for a moment, because, well, I know the man who used to be the editor there, Steve Wolf.
Yep.
Steve and I went to the same college. He's a little bit older than me. I'm not going to tell you how much older, but Steve predated me at Hamilton, and nice guy who I believe is retired now for the most part. Would he have been your boss there?
So he was, and Steve was actually one of the reasons I got my job at ESPN Magazine. Somebody my grandparents knew that Steve worked at ESPN Magazine, and he was their neighbor up in Westchester, and they took my resume and put it in Steve's mailbox. And Steve called me and brought me in and started me at ESPN Magazine as a fact checker, which, if anybody's ever done print journalism, fact checking is a dreadful job. You have to read every word in every story and triple check it, 3 sources. The joke is, if your driver's license appears in print, or if your name appears in print, check it against your driver's license. So I started as a fact checker, and it was really Steve who got me through the door. So, and yes, he was an editor the entire time that I was at ESPN, and I learned so much from Steve. He's tremendous.
Very good. Was sports journalism always what you wanted to do? When did that start? And did it have anything to do with your grandfather, or did that come from a totally different place?
I think my love of sports definitely came from my grandfather. I had no idea what I wanted to do going into college, like a lot of kids, and I will give full credit for the journalism thing to my mom. I took a bunch of AP classes in high school, one of which was English, but I also took AP chemistry and AP bio, and I was not good at science. But what got me through those classes was the fact that I was a really good writer and was able to get my thoughts out and did really well on the essay portions of those AP exams. And my mother always said, "You're such a good writer. Why don't you go to journalism school?" And for lack of a better idea, that was what I did.
What did your grandfather think of that choice? He liked it?
I mean, yeah. I mean, afterwards, it was fun. When I was at ESPN Magazine, my grandmother used to go through each issue of the magazine and put those little miniature yellow Post-it notes on all the pages where I had written something. And then she would leave them on the island in the kitchen so Grandpa could go through and read all the stuff I had written. So I was very close with my grandparents. And whenever I was on the road, I would call them often from where I was. And Grandpa always liked to see the stories in the magazine. He'd be like, "Oh, this is the one you did when you called me from Phoenix." Like, so he would know where I had been and then check out what I did in the magazine based on where I had been. So it was kind of a fun little activity we had.
You sent us a couple of great photographs of you and Yogi. The one on the left, you said, was from the early 1980s at, I guess the second incarnation of Yankee Stadium. How old were you in that one?
This is July of 1984, and I am 6 years old. If there's any older folks on the call, I always like to point out the digital Casio calculator watch in the bottom left, which really dates the photo. But yeah, I loved to go to games with my dad, and the afternoon games were great. I was 6, my brother was 4, and he would take us to a lot of the afternoon games. Funny thing is, I did not eat hot dogs, and that was basically the only food option at Yankee Stadium back then. And my grandmother she was a farm girl from Missouri, used to fry up a big batch of fried chicken and bring it in a picnic basket to the game. And we would sit there in the seats right next to the Yankee dugout. And I actually used to sit, there's this little wall, I'm pointing like you guys can see, there's a little wall on the right side there. It was like a low concrete wall. And I would sit with one leg on one side, one leg on the other. And I would have my little Spalding glove on my left hand and a chicken leg in my right hand, but I wasn't allowed to sit on that thing unless I had the glove on, because Grandpa was afraid we were going to get our heads taken off with foul balls. So he had rules. But yeah, we had a great time going to those games. And the last photo there is, or the photo on the right is probably the winter. This is Thanksgiving, the year before Grandpa passed away. So those are about 40 years apart, those photos.
Going back to the photos, 84 is what you said?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I imagine you got to meet some of the players on that team?
Yeah, my favorite was Dave Winfield with the flip-up sunglasses.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, that was Dave and Willie Randolph, Ricky Henderson. There were a lot of good guys on those early 80s teams.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. Had Mattingly joined the team by then?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he was there as well. Being so close to the first base dugout, you must have heard some of the conversations taking place.
I'm sure I did, but it's not something that I remember. I just used to like to hang over the wall and try to catch foul balls.
Yeah. Were you good at that?
Yeah, pretty good.
Yeah. So 6 years of age, some of your earliest memories at the ballpark. You mentioned that you and your grandfather were very close. Let's talk about what he was like. You know, there's a public persona. There's the persona of Yogi Berra with all of the great quotations that have been attributed to him over the years, the funny stories that he has told, the unique way that he had with the language. And then there's the real life Yogi Berra. Were they pretty much one and the same, or were they completely different?
They were exactly the same. My grandfather did not know how to put on any airs. What you saw was what you got. What he was like at the ballpark or on TV or at the dinner table was basically exactly the same. My family, we always say that whether you were literally the president of the United States, because he met like 6 of them, or the UPS guy or his dry cleaner or the waiter at the restaurant or his attorney, everybody got the same person. His grandkids got the same person. He was very, very much like what you saw on television, and he did often speak in Yogiisms. People were always like, well, give us one. I'm like, I don't know, everything he said was kind of like that, just based on his very unique way of looking at the world. Everything was very much black or white, right or wrong, no shades of gray. If you needed advice and went to Grandpa, he was going to give you the hard truth right away. And you were going to be like, oh God, I shouldn't have asked. He's totally right. Because as we know, the right thing to do isn't always the easy thing to do, but Grandpa was very quick to point out what was the right thing. So it was good.
You know, over the years, I've had a chance to interview many of the Hall of Famers, sometimes in-depth interviews. I really didn't have a chance to talk to Yogi all that in depth. I would occasionally meet him behind the stage prior to induction ceremony, because I would have to make announcements during the pre-ceremony part of the day. And he always, whenever I saw him, he struck me as kind of quiet, soft-spoken. Would you say that's accurate?
Yeah, definitely. He wasn't going to like interject himself into a lot of conversations, but if you went at him and asked him something, you could definitely get him going for sure. But I also think like he quieted down a bit in his older years.
One thing I do remember asking about were the Aflac commercials that he did a few years before he passed. which I thought were wonderful and
Yeah.
were beautifully done. He seemed to enjoy those.
He had a lot of fun doing a lot of the commercials. I remember when he did the Pringles commercial, and they sent. I mean, I don't know how they thought one family could eat so many potato chips. We had cases and cases of potato chips in the house. I love the old jockey commercial with him and my uncles arguing about wearing white or colored underwear. That one is fantastic. You can find that on YouTube if you put that in. The Aflac commercial was obviously a very funny one. Ron Guidry tells an amazing story. Grandpa was down at spring training and actually left spring training to go and film that Aflac commercial, and Gator gave him a ride. It was basically Grandpa's chauffeur. There's Harvey Araton's book is about that, Driving Mr. Yogi. So Gator had driven Grandpa to the airport to go for the Aflac commercial, and then went to pick him up when he returned from filming the commercial. And as soon as Gator opened the door of the truck, he's like, Yogi, how'd it go? How was the shoot? And the first thing Grandpa says, Gator, the duck don't talk. So, I mean, just really funny.
We'd be remiss if we did not talk about Yogi's wife, Carmen. She passed away just 1 year before Yogi did, and you were very close to her as well.
Yeah, my parents divorced when I was young at about 5, and my grandparents, I was there a lot. They helped to kind of watch me when I was a kid, and I became very, very close with my grandparents. And I was also very lucky to have them for a very large portion of my life. My grandma passed when I was 36, and my grandpa Yogi when I was 38. And a lot of us don't get a chance to spend that much time with our grandparents. Some of us lose them at 10, and we know them as the people we see on the holidays, and they give us cool presents and, sneak us snacks behind our parents' back. But I got to have really very adult relationships with my grandparents and understand where they came from as people. Grandpa Yogi obviously was the son of Italian immigrants. He was very poor when he grew up. My grandmother grew up on a farm 2 hours, I think it's southwest of St. Louis, in a town called Boss, Missouri. And the farmhouse that she grew up in didn't have running water or electricity until the 70s. So my dad, as a child, would go out and visit and have to leave in the middle of the night in the pitch black Missouri wilderness and go pee in the outhouse. But that was how my grandmother grew up. So, bringing that, perspective to the New York Yankees, where all of a sudden it's just lights and glitter. It was really amazing how the two of them kind of navigated those changes. And it was really cool. They never did not appreciate what they had coming from where they had come from. And I always just loved listening to their stories. My grandmother was much more of a talker than my grandfather. It was tough to get my grandfather to talk about his experiences growing up, unless you asked him very pointed questions. But I used to spend a lot of time with them. They lived out here in Montclair, New Jersey, and I did as well. I used to have soccer games on Monday nights, and I would go up to their house after soccer and eat the leftovers and hang out and watch whatever West Coast ball game Grandpa had on and just chat. We used to watch Seinfeld reruns a lot. Grandpa loved Seinfeld, even to the point when I was in college, PBS used to have the old Seinfeld reruns on from 11 to 11:30, and I would call my grandfather at like 11:29 at night. And my roommate at the beginning, she was like, "Why are you calling your grandparents in the middle of the night?" I'm like, No. It's a perfect time to get him. He's just getting out of his blue chair. He's going in the kitchen, get a glass of water. He's going to go upstairs, and I'm getting him right before he goes upstairs. So it was perfect. But yeah, we were close, and I really did spend a lot of time with them. I was very lucky.
I want to get back to Carmen in a moment, but you bring up Seinfeld, which is one of my favorite shows. Many former Yankees were mentioned during the course of that program. I can't remember offhand, though, was Yogi's name mentioned?
I think it was mentioned in a couple different times. They did a few times try to write him into a script where he would like make some sort of an appearance, but it never came to fruition. I'm not sure why. I know at one point they didn't like the script. And then it was supposed to be rewritten, and then it wasn't. But I'm definitely just kind of remembering probably half truths off the top of my head. But I'm not really sure if he got like actual airtime.
Yeah, there were many references to Mickey Mantle, Clete Boyer, who actually used to live on Main Street in Cooperstown a number of years ago. More recent Yankees like Danny Tartabull, Buck Showalter, Paul O'Neill, Bernie Williams, Derek Jeter were on there as well.
Yeah.
Going back to Carmen, I grew up as a Yankee fan. I used to watch all the Yankee broadcasts on WPIX, Rizzuto and White and Messer. And there were always two wives that were mentioned and very much linked with their Hall of Fame husbands. One of them was Phil Rizzuto's wife, Cora, and the other was your grandfather's wife, your grandmother, Carmen. Those two ladies really kind of became almost synonymous with Yankee culture in the 60s and 70s. Even though their playing careers had passed by, they were still very much a part of Yankee culture. And you always heard Phil Rizzuto talk about Cora, and he would often make reference to Yogi and Carmen. That came up always.
Yeah. I would put Joni Ford in there probably too, because they were like kind of the three musketeers, Whitey's wife, Joni. But yeah, Grandpa was very, very close and stayed close throughout his life with a lot of his teammates. But the ones that I knew best and saw the most were the ones who lived around here. And Whitey was just out in Long Island, and Scooter was here in New Jersey. So we saw Joni and Cora and Phil and Whitey quite often. And my grandmother was very close with the wives. Grandpa right down to the end there with Phil. He was going to Phil's nursing home a few times a week to play cards with him, just to hang out. They were really close. And then there's a funny story. This was maybe 3 or 4 years before Grandpa passed. Grandpa heard Grammy on the phone, presumably with Joni Ford. And I think what they probably were doing was talking about when they were going to go down to spring training. And I guess they were talking dates and costs and something. And my grandfather, young Eddie Ford, overheard the other end of this conversation. My grandfather called Whitey and he said, "Whitey, I think the girls are going to put us in a home." So he heard them and thought that they were discussing putting them in a nursing home, not the hotel rates for spring training, which was really funny. But yeah, they were close for a long time. I told the story on the Hall of Fame Connections thing about Grammy sitting with Cora during the perfect game, and how my Uncle Dale ended up getting his name. Dale Mitchell was the last batter in the perfect game. And Grammy had said to Cora, she was 8 months pregnant. And she said, if Don strikes this guy out, I'll name my baby Dale. And in her head, the name Dale worked for either a boy or a girl. And she ended up having a boy, and Don struck out Dale Mitchell, and I have an Uncle Dale, but it was Cora who was on the receiving end of that. They were just kind of like the three musketeers together all the time. So
I had never heard that about
Oh.
Dale and that name until I watched the Hall of Fame Connections episode. In fact, I just watched it yesterday in preparation for this. Let's talk a little bit about the end for Yogi. He passed away. I think it was it 2015 or 16?
Yeah, September of 15.
Did you know it was coming? Did you have a chance to properly say goodbye? How did that go at the end?
Yeah, he was in an assisted living facility for probably, since my gram died, for like a year and a half. She died about 18 months before he did. And he was like in and out. Some days he would be great, know exactly what was going on, and other days he would think he had a tea time at 2:00 in Florida. There wasn't a time where he was unhappy, and he really was not particularly unhealthy either. He just was 90. And so I was up there. It's only about 12 minutes away from me. And I would go up there pretty much every afternoon and either put on the Yankee game for him or put on the pregame show. Hearing baseball always really brought him back into the moment, and he would be able to totally have a conversation with you about what he was seeing on the television, and he would know that the players. But if, in the absence of that, sometimes he would start to drift. But I would say, yes, I got to spend a ton of time with him at the end. And again, just very grateful for every minute of it.
Pretty good life, 90 years,
Oh, God,
so
yeah,
many accomplishments on the field, off the field. I guess we should all hope to do as well.
Yeah, and I say this a lot too. Like the Grandpa was in the D-Day invasion, right? He was on an LCSS, which was a tiny boat that came off of a larger boat, in his case, the USS Bayfield. So he's on this thing with 6 guys as a machine gunner's assistant, firing machine guns at the beach for our troops, as cover fire for our troops going ashore. Omaha Beach, there was a big German 88 gun on either side. Those things made these whistling noises over. I heard him talk about those a few times. I mean, I think that he very much believed that there was no reason he should have come home. And all the things that he was able to do after that, I think he just was so, like, I don't think he ever took any of that for granted. The fact that he was able to come home and meet my grandmother and have my dad and my uncles and be with the Yankees and have grandkids and have a family and do all the things that he did. I don't think that I'm going to cry saying this, but I don't think he ever for a moment thought about or forgot about how lucky he was to have had that opportunity when so many people didn't come home, and given the very real chance that he could not have come home. So
I imagine that had to alter his perspective. Any problems that
absolutely.
he endured in baseball compared to what he endured in World War II probably seemed pretty mild.
Yeah, and he didn't stay mad a lot. He left a lot of that stuff at the ballpark. He was very practical as a player and also as a fan. He believed that if you didn't win, it was because you didn't play well enough to win, and you better figure out what you did wrong so you can improve for tomorrow, or you're going to lose again. And there was never any blaming the bats, blaming the other team, blaming the umpire. He just and a loss was a loss. It wasn't like a devastating thing. It was something to learn from and come back tomorrow and do better. I remember somebody saying to him at a restaurant one time that they were so upset by the Yankees loss that they hadn't gone to work the next day. And he's actually said to the guy, "You think Derek Jeter gets mad when you don't do good at your job?" like, oh my God, Grandpa. But he definitely called it like you saw it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm still a Yankee fan to this day. We're supposed to be objective here at the Hall of Fame, and we like baseball in general, but we still hold on to our fandoms, if you will. And as much as the Yankees have struggled this year, I always keep reminding myself, you know what's better than last year when we weren't even playing baseball by this time last year. At least we're able to play the games. Fans are able to go to the games. We had this tremendous celebration at the All-Star game last night. So it is important to keep things in perspective.
Absolutely.
Lindsay, I want to talk about the stamp that came out. I used to be a stamp collector back in the 1970s. And I think it was
philatelist. I just learned that word. I have to use it. Philatelist.
Yes. Oh yeah. Yeah. It eventually gave way to baseball card collecting, but I still have some of the stamps somewhere at home. And I think it was special occasions like these kinds of commemorative stamps that made me a fan and really got me into stamp collecting for quite a while. This came out June 24th, 2021. I think it's a beautiful image. I love it. Your thoughts on it?
I think it's fantastic. Like, I get permagrin, I actually just picked up this morning. I dropped a sheet of the stamps off at our local frame shop to get framed. And I just picked it up this morning and it looks great. My family could not be more excited about this. We found out about it around April 2020, I guess, a year before it was going to come out. And they actually had considered Grandpa for the stamp starting in about 2016. You have to already be dead to be on a stamp. And it's a very, very long process. They have like a civilian board that has to approve who or what can or cannot be on a stamp. And it takes a long time. And when they approached my family about it, my dad is the oldest son, and he also was a stamp collector, and had in the 5th grade asked his teacher, "How do I get my dad on a stamp?" And she had said, "Oh, well, Larry, you might want to wait a while because he has to be dead." So my dad was thrilled when he found out that Grandpa was going to be on the stamp. And my dad and my uncles were pretty involved with the different permutations of the artwork that were going to be on the stamp, but the Postmaster General and several other very high ups in the post office happened to be lifelong Yankee fans, and they took a particular interest in this stamp. The first few images were of Grandpa playing, so a photo of him swinging a bat or in his catcher's gear. And they thought that because of Grandpa's ginormous personality and what he did and how important he was to people outside of baseball, that you should be able to see his face and see his personality. So when they landed on this image where you can see the NY on the Yankee cap, so you know he's a Yankee, you can see the chest protector, so you know he's a catcher, and you can see that great smile, so you know that he has a big personality as well. We all just thought it was pretty perfect for Grandpa's stamp.
Now, the stamp is based on this photograph that we see on the right. I don't know anything about the artist. I'm going to ask you about that. But whoever the artist is pretty much captured the photograph and pretty much captured Yogi, as you indicate.
Yeah, he did. His name is, hang on, I don't want to say it wrong. I have it like right on my, his last name is Alcala. I think his first name is Alexander Alcala. Anyway, but he does a lot of stamps for the post office, and he did a tremendous job with this. It was great. It's a digital, it's a drawing that they embellished digitally. I don't know exactly how it was done, but they did a great job. And then they made the Yogi Berra down on the bottom. They had a special font designed for that, and I think it's great too.
Yankee colors in some ways as well, as you look at the writing, the font. And this is part of a series, the Forever series, correct?
Yeah, so the forever stamps that just means that they are good for forever. So whatever a stamp costs now, I think it's 55 cents. If it costs 58 cents in 3 years, this one is still good, and you can use it to send your letters. But obviously the fact that it says Yogi Berra Forever on it, like, my family could not be more happy about that, because we want his legacy to go on for forever. So yes, Yogi Berra Forever. And I also think it's just great, we'll talk later about my grandfather's museum, but we really try to bring his legacy to a new generation of people, to people who may not know who he is. And when you get this stamp in the mail, I've already gotten a bunch of them, you see this smiley human on your mail, and even if you don't know who he is, you might say, hey, who's this happy fella, and give his name a Google. And it's just a great way for us to keep his legacy alive and keep him in the public consciousness. So we think it's terrific.
One of our viewers points out that the artist is Antonio Alcala.
Antonio Alcala. I knew it was an A. I apologize, Antonio. He was great.
Antonio Alcala did a great job on this. Another interesting thing I noticed here, and I don't remember this from my stamp collecting of decades ago, but they actually have the year on the stamp. They have 2021 in the left-hand corner. I don't remember seeing that on many stamps in the past.
That I'm not sure of. I certainly think it's a cool addition, a nice touch. It's very tiny on the actual stamps. It's like you almost can't see it if you have old lady eyes like I do. But yeah, it's on there. That's pretty cool.
So you like the stamp. I like the stamp. Pretty much the entire family gave its approval.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Now, earlier this year, there was a ceremony when the stamp was released, June 24th, not that long ago. And there was a ceremony that actually took place at the Yogi Berra Museum and Learning Center. We have a couple of photographs from that event at the Berra Museum. You were there that day. Must have been a lot of fun.
It was great. So yeah, that Bob Costas was the MC of the event. And in the photo on the left, you can see my dad, my Uncle Tim, and my Uncle Dale on the right clapping. And that's Costas and one of the post office officials on the left. And what was also cool about this particular event, just as a stamp event, was that they do these first day of issue celebrations for every new Forever stamp, but this was the first one that they were able to hold in person due to COVID. So we knew we had to have it outside because it was too many people to be in the museum. We had this beautiful, it was like 75 and sunny. If that's not grandpa smiling, I don't know what is. It was great. We had several hundred people out there in the parking lot in front of the museum, and Bob Costas gave a great talk. The post office folks did great. My uncle said a few words, and then they took the curtain off of this giant 11-foot stamp that you see there, which was also pretty cool to see it big. And then they had the post office trucks there giving people first day of issue envelopes with the canceled stamp on them. I am not a big stamp collector, but apparently that is a very big deal. And yeah, it was just a really great, fun event.
I tried to find a picture from this day with you in it, but you must have been mixing in with the crowd because I couldn't find you.
Yeah, there's a lot of these have me have the back of my head. That one that you showed in the beginning of me holding the big stamp poster was from this day.
And this was right on the front steps of the museum. We're going to talk a little bit about that. You're on the board of directors for the Berra Museum and Learning Center. What do you think your grandfather would have thought of this spectacle? Stamp featuring his likeness. There's that that famous quote attributed to him, "Thank you for making this day necessary." I imagine he might have said something like that. But in a more serious vein, how do you think he would have treated something like this if he had been
I'm
around?
glad that you didn't ask me what he would have said, because my answer to that is just I'm very aware that if you can't imitate him, don't copy him. So I don't try to make up yogisms on the spot. But I just think he would have been really proud of it. He, like I said, he was the child of, immigrants. His three older brothers were actually born in Italy, and he grew up so poor on the hill in St. Louis. But when he was 18 years old, he decided that it was his duty to serve his adopted country, and he was playing baseball semi-pro in Norfolk, Virginia. He literally walked over to the naval base and enlisted before he had the chance to be drafted, because he felt that it was his duty to serve his country. As we know, he ends up off of Omaha Beach during the D-Day invasion and gets a chance to come home, and then does this other incredible thing with his life in baseball, and gets to, gets married to my Grammy Carmen, has kids, grandkids, great grandkids before he dies. He just lives this amazing American life. It's an immigrant story, a veteran story. I always say he's kind of like a tiny little microcosm of the American dream. And this stamp is such an iconic American honor. And when you think about like all those things, and boil grandpa's life down into this little image that's on the stamp, I just think he would think it was really, really cool. And I think that he would be thinking, oh my God, what would my parents think about this? Because it's tremendous.
He always struck me as very humble, very modest. I'm sure, like you said, he would have been thrilled, but I also sensed that he would have been saying to himself, wow, why are they doing all this for me?
Yeah, I think though he was super, super humble, and but he was also smart. And when people came up to him and told him how, like, he believed the people when they told him how much he meant to them. How other immigrants, other veterans, kind of inspired by the life that grandpa was able to live. So I think that he understood that he meant something to someone, or to other people. And I think he was, as humble as he was, he was proud that he had a positive impact on people's lives. And he would have been very proud of this too.
Now, the ceremony took place at the Berra Museum and Learning Center, which is located in Little Falls, New Jersey, and it's actually right on the campus of Montclair State. Here is a photograph from the museum. I was there many years ago. The former director, Dave Kaplan, asked me to actually deliver a talk about Roberto Clemente, who was my favorite player growing up, and I was honored to do so. It's been a number of years since I've been there, so I haven't really seen the updates and additions that you've done in recent years. But if you could give us a little bit of an overview, Lindsay, of the museum, how many rooms there are, how big it is, what the focus of the museum is.
It's not big. I have no idea exactly how big it is, but we have done a renovation since you've been there. There's now a big glass atrium on the front that has other exhibits in it. So you should definitely come back. We have a theater that we can show. We have a couple different programs that we show in there, but you can screen movies in there. It seats, I think, about 65 people. And we have the requisite shiny things that museums have to have. We have all 27 Yankees World Series rings. We have grandpa's 3 MVP plaques. We have lots of like gloves and bats and jerseys and stuff that people can see. We have a really cool interactive digital exhibit where you throw these kind of squishy baseballs against this LCD kind of cartoon screen with a batter, and the kids can see how fast, how hard they're throwing. It's called pitch. But the Yogi Berra Museum and Learning Center, the Learning Center part of it was, more than a place to just put grandpa's stuff. He wanted it to be a place where kids could come and learn. He quit school in the 8th grade to help his parents make money to pay the bills. And he was kind of self-conscious of the fact that he hadn't finished his education. As soon as he had enough money to do so, he started a scholarship fund at Columbia University that still exists today. So the education part of the museum was very important. And the museum has a bunch of different education programs for kids that teach capsules based on my grandfather's values of excellence and treating people with respect and embracing diversity, and being a good teammate and a good leader. We teach STEM education programs on the science and math affiliated with baseball. There's a spoken word program where kids write poetry inspired by Grandpa's Yogiisms. Right now we have a temporary exhibit on load from the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum in Kansas City called Discover Greatness. It's a history of the Negro Leagues. And we also have a capsule that goes along with that. And then another one on civil rights and diversity, kind of teaching the history of racism in the country through the history of racism in sports. So we do a lot of virtual programs. And at the beginning of COVID, we do a lot of education programs. At the beginning of COVID, we were forced to take them virtual. And that ended up being a real blessing in disguise for us, because a lot of school districts in our area can't afford busing to send all the kids to the museum. But with the virtual exhibits, we were able to have so many more kids actually participate in these programs, including kids from Grandpa's hometown of St. Louis, Houston, where he managed the Astros, Atlanta, Cleveland, Florida, Louisiana. Ron Guidry's daughter is a teacher in a school district in Louisiana, and all of her 5th and 6th graders did the virtual programs. So COVID was a bit of a blessing for us from that respect, but you can certainly come and visit the brick and mortar museum and check it out. It's adjacent to the Montclair State University baseball stadium, where the New Jersey Jackals also play. It's a minor league team, so you can come and watch a baseball game and go to the museum. It makes for a really fun visit.
So you're going to continue to offer both the virtual and on-site programs?
Absolutely.
That's great. I'm curious where your teachers come from. You know, we have educational programs here at the Hall of Fame. We've been doing them, well, actually, we've been doing virtual for about 20 years now. We've been doing on-site programs since the early 1990s, when Bill Guilfoyle, who was one of our former executives, used to work for the Yankees back in the 1960s. Bill was one of the people who started our educational programs here at the Baseball Hall of Fame. We draw our teachers, mostly retired teachers from the local area. I'm curious where your teachers come from.
We kind of go the other way. There's a very small staff at the museum. We only have 4 full-time employees. One of them is an educational director who has written the curriculums for the programs, but most of the folks are educational. They're kind of like interns, but they're paid. They are in the teachers program at Montclair State University. We're on the campus of Montclair State University, so they tend to be, we have a lot of younger folks who help us do the programs.
There's nothing like being at a museum on a spring day when there's all sorts of kids there, school groups. You're walking around, and that's, I don't know, for a museum professional like me, that's heaven.
Yeah, and when Grandpa was still alive, he used to hang out in the museum a lot. He loved to like go out on our little skybox and watch batting practice and stuff, but he would sneak up on the kids' groups. Like a kid would have his hand on a mitt or a bat, and he would whisper in their ear, "Hey kid, stop touching my stuff." And they would like jump out of their skin, and everybody else would laugh. But he loved being around, and the same thing, like you just said, watching the kids go through and watching the kids react to what they're seeing.
Did they know who he was right away?
Oh yeah, at that time, because like his picture was right on the wall and he didn't look much different. So.
That's right. Let's talk a little bit more about the efforts that you put into this museum. I know you take a lot of pride in it, rightly so. You're on the board of directors. Tell us what your specific role is in trying to support and advance the Museum and Learning Center.
So I'm the only family member on the board, and I do, as far as like my roles and stuff are concerned, it really is like with participating in the educational programs and giving tours. Every time that there's a kids group in the museum, I don't live very far away. If I'm available, I'll come for the last half and answer any questions kids have. And same thing with the virtual ones. There was a while, basically March, April, May, June of 2020, and then September through the end of the school year this year, we were doing probably 3 school groups a day, which was a lot because I have other work to do, but I would try to go in for like the last 15 or 20 minutes and answer any questions the kids would have specifically about my grandfather. The educational volunteers do a great job with the other parts of the program. We can certainly answer those questions, but I try to be involved in as many of those as I can. Whenever we have in-person events at the museum, I try to get there for those. I just, the whole idea for me is just to keep talking about my grandfather to as many people who will listen, because I do want to keep that legacy alive and make him more than just a name kids occasionally hear, like try to put some personality behind what their parents tell them about what he did on the field. And also, I do really believe that my grandfather's skills on the baseball field are overlooked. So I try to talk a lot about his incredible achievements as a player. I always point to the 2015 All-Star game when I say this, because people are like, oh yeah, he's not overrated. Major League Baseball brought out the 4 greatest living players before that game. And it was Hank Aaron, Willie Mays, Sandy Koufax, and Johnny Bench. And I was at the assisted living facility watching the game with my grandfather. And I looked at him and in my head, I'm like, he has more World Series than all 4 of these guys combined. And they didn't even call him. They could have done the 5 greatest living players. And I just looked at him and I said, are you dead? And he goes, not yet. And for Major League Baseball to not put him in a group of the greatest living players at that time, I thought was just a hallmark example of how underrated he really was as a player. So I try to talk a lot about how good he really was.
We have about 10 minutes remaining with Lindsay Barrow. We're going to try to take as many questions as we can the rest of the way. We also have some comments. I want to start with one from Perry Barber, an umpire who was
Perry, hi. I know
Perry. So Perry has kind of a long message, but I think it's worth reading. She says, hi, Lindsay. I don't eat hot dogs either. She then goes on to say, one of my favorite items of unusual baseball memorabilia that I have is a cast from when I broke my wrist in 2006. It was signed by Don Larson and your granddad the year of the 50-year anniversary of Larson's perfect World Series game. After Yogi signed it, he looked at the signature and he said, wow, signing a cast is not easy. Even I can't tell that's my signature. Let me do it again. And he did. So that's kind of a neat story. Perry then has a question for you. What is your favorite or most unusual item of Yogi memorabilia that either you own or the museum owns?
Unusual Yogi. Okay, so I don't have a lot of unusual Yogi Berra memorabilia, mostly because my grandfather didn't keep a lot of stuff. A lot of stuff that's in the museum we had to go out and like re-find, because he didn't think, as humble as he was, he didn't think of himself as that good. The craziest piece of Yogi memorabilia I know of in existence, I was out at oh my god, why am I totally blanking on Bruce, Grandpa's backup catcher with the Yankees, Charlie Silvera and his wife Rose live in California, Millbrae, California, outside of San Francisco, in a house that every year Charlie would write Grandpa a letter inside his Christmas card. Still living in the house you bought me, thanks Charlie, because he bought it with his World Series bonuses in the 50s, and they were still living in that. And Charlie just recently passed away. Rose is still in the house, but I went out to visit them the last time I was in San Francisco, and they walked me into their living room. And those like commemorative ceramic beer steins that people have, they have a whole bunch of those. And Charlie points, he says, go to the first one on the right and bring that down. And in that, he has what is allegedly my grandfather's a jockstrap of his signed with Yogi Berra on the jockstrap. So that is the most unusual piece of Yogi Berra memorabilia that I know exists. As far as ones that, like, I have this weird thing over here. Grandpa used to say that he would squeeze pinky balls all the time to make his grip good. And I have he signed it Larry Berra actually on this. Let me get this in the camera. On this Spalding high bounce pinky ball. Yeah. So I have that there on my desk. Kind of fun.
Nice. You mentioned Charlie Silvera. He became a longtime coach. As I remember, he was one of Billy Martin's coaches with the Detroit Tigers. I think he and Billy were pretty close. So. Another question coming in from Alex Karen. Question for Lindsay. Yogi was great friends with Joe Garagiola. Do you have any memories or stories about Joe and Yogi together?
So Grandpa and Joe talked to each other several times a week for their entire lives. They grew up right across the street from each other on the hill in St. Louis. Their fathers worked in the brickyards together. And they each would say, Grandpa would say, there was never a day I didn't know Joe. And Joe would say, there was never a day I didn't know Yogi. Joe was with my grandfather when he met my Grammy Carmen. My grandparents were with Joe when he met Audrey Gragiola at the roller rink where she played the organ. So they go so far back. And my dad is good friends with young Joe Gragiola. I am good friends with Joe's granddaughter Meredith. So it's a family, the friendship just goes through the generations, and it's really nice. I had my grandfather on the phone with Joe Garagiola the evening before he passed away. So they got to say hello and hear each other's voices, for that last time. But literally, they were friends for 90 years. 90 years. It's crazy. And I have a lot, I was at a lot of dinners and stuff with Joe, and got to know his wife, Audrey, as well. Nothing like, super specific, just kind of like being in the house and listening to him and grandpa tell stories about growing up, and remember this guy and remember that guy, and the nicknames that they had for the guys who played on the Stags, which was their Sandlot League team up on the hill. Crazy. Two of whom actually made the 1950 World Cup team, the famous team that beat England. A lot of great athletes coming from the hill.
Question from Scott Blake. The jerseys in the museum photo, what is the significance of them?
I was just thinking about that. I'm not sure, because in that case right now, we have all Yankee catchers jerseys. So we have a Thurman Munson, a Jorge Posada. Who else is in that case? Anyway, it's Yankee catchers jerseys now. So I am not sure. That Dodgers 8 jersey, I think is Don. Oh, you know what? So that's Don Mattingly's jersey from the Dodgers with the 8 on it. And then the 32 would be Elston Howard, correct? Elston Howard's jersey as a catcher.
That sounds right.
So the Elston jersey is probably still in the case, and we have it with a Thurman Munson and a Jorge Posada, and that Donnie jersey is somewhere else now. It's over in this left corner.
Question.
Donnie wore number 8. Don obviously wore number 23 when he played, but he wore number 8 as a coach in honor of Grandpa.
Scott points out that number 8 used to be worn by John Roseboro, catcher for the Dodgers back in the 60s, but now sported by Don Mattingly. Or later sported by Don Mattingly when he was with the Dodgers as their manager. Question from Connor Zacharuski. Connor, I hope I pronounced your name correctly. Connor wants to know quite simply, Lindsay, what is your favorite item on display in the museum? Favorite item or favorite
item? Okay, so if you look in the very back of this photo, you see where it says courage. The word to the left of that would have said honor, but it doesn't say that. Right under the N, there's a photo in a frame that you can't really see. That is a one-off charcoal drawing of my grandfather that was done by Leroy Neiman, the famous sports artist, sitting in the stands at Fort Lauderdale Stadium in 1964. And it really just so well captures my grandfather. It doesn't have a face. It's just a bunch of charcoal lines on a piece of paper. And it's amazing. And it was in a poster tube. And my grandparents were moving from one house to the other in the late 70s. And my dad sees this poster tube and a pile of trash in the driveway. And he goes through it because he doesn't trust my grandmother. And he finds this and he says, "Hey, Ma, are you sure you want to throw this out?" And she was like, because she had just gotten sick of looking in every box and had just put a bunch of stuff in the trash. So it was salvaged from the trash by my dad and my mom, who had gone over there to visit. And actually, hold on one second. It is my favorite item, and I would never have it because there's only one, but we did have prints made of it for an exhibit, a Neiman exhibit we did a couple of years ago. So you can sort of see what it would look like. It's on my wall. Nice. I have a print of it. Anyway, so if the place were burning down, that's the one thing I would grab.
Yeah. Let's see. We have one more, sort of a question, I guess, but maybe more of a story comes into us from Lawrence. During COVID, a number of us KC Royals Stadium tour guides stayed in touch via Zoom. We would talk with a different Royals employee every week. We always ended each meeting with a Yogiism. We discovered the Royals Director of Guest Experience was related to your family and attended a family reunion. Most interesting was the fact that I guess one time Yogi was at a party and he wore a name tag just like everybody else because he wanted to make sure everybody knew who he was. Yeah. Do you know who that might be, that employee? Does that ring a bell?
I was at the World Series in Kansas City in 2014. A young guy stopped me on the concourse and said he was related to me. A young, tall kid with blonde hair.
Yeah.
I don't know. So if he's still working for the Royals, it could be him, but I'm not really sure. There's a lot of extended Italian family cousins in the Midwest there.
Yeah. Lindsay, we have just a couple of minutes remaining. I want to talk a little bit about your new initiative. You and Carlos Pena of the MLB Network, several of our curators have been doing the program's Hall of Fame Connections. I believe the third in the series came out earlier today. That's going to continue for the next several weeks on YouTube. Tell us a little bit about this effort.
So this was really fun. There's actually 4 or 13 of them, I think. So they'll continue for the next 10 weeks on YouTube. The idea was there's 2 episodes in each release, and the first episode voices over, so last week was from a yogi to a king, and they used baseball artifacts and stories to connect my grandfather to the King of England. So if you haven't seen it, it's very interesting. It's kind of like the Kevin Bacon game of baseball artifacts. And then following that voiced over episode, there's another one called Hall of Fame Connections Extra Innings with me, Carlos, and a curator from the Hall of Fame. And we're actually holding and touching the artifacts that they talk about in the first episode and just telling more stories about each individual piece. And the curators up at the Hall of Fame, I have to say, they are just so chock full of crazy information, and it is so interesting. So you should definitely give both of those episodes a watch if you have the time each week. They're really good.
This is the myth that you talked about from the 1956 World Series, the Don Larson game.
Mm-hmm.
You got a chance to hold that mid. That must have felt pretty special.
It is really fun. So I've seen it a few times before. When I come to the Hall of Fame, Tom Schieber, one of the curators, tends to pull this out for me. And I saw it in the Hall of Fame's traveling exhibit, and I saw it when I was up there. But it is pretty cool for me to if there was one moment my grandfather was probably most proud of in his career, that was probably it. And the fact that that's the glove he used to do it is pretty neat. And again, do we have time for me to tell that story about Jackie Robinson?
Sure. Absolutely.
So in the 1955 World Series, obviously Jackie Robinson steals home. Grandpa would insist for forever that he had in fact been out. And after the 1955 season, my grandfather got his first glove deal with Spalding. And when in 1955, he had a much more donut style glove that was closed on the side, where you see that on the right side of this glove, the right, as we're looking at it in the picture, it has that hinge. The one he used in 55 didn't have that. And he had to catch the ball, cover it with his hand, and then move it over to make the tag on Jackie coming in from third base. And Grandpa always thought that had he had a hinge in his glove and he was able to just close his hand on the ball and make the sweep tag, it would have been more obvious to the umpire, Bill Summers, that Jackie had in fact been out. So when he gets his opportunity to design a glove with Spalding, he has them put this very deep hinge, which makes the glove much more manipulatable with one hand. So I always say that in addition to breaking the color barrier in baseball, Jackie Robinson also helped to revolutionize the catcher's mitt.
And I understand that your grandfather and Jackie became pretty close in spite of the dispute about that call. Obviously, there was nothing personal against Jackie.
But actually, so what a lot of people don't realize is they had actually been very close prior to that. My grandfather played the 1946 season after World War II with the Newark Bears in Newark, New Jersey. Jackie Robinson played the 1946 season with the Montreal Royals, minor league team, both minor league teams. And they faced each other in the postseason that year in a 7-game series. So they had 7 opportunities to meet and chat. And there was also a controversial play at the plate in those games involving Grandpa and Jackie. So they actually met there in 1946. And when Jackie broke the color barrier in 47, they already knew each other. And Grandpa would always make a point of going over and talking with Jackie when he could. And my grandmother knew Rachel, Jackie's wife. So by the time 1955 rolls around, they know each other really well. And they stayed friendly until Jackie passed away in 1972. And then my grandparents stayed friendly with Rachel Robinson. There's actually a great image, or a great story about Rachel coming to my grandfather's 90th birthday party. So this is 40 years after her husband passed away, and she was still coming to kind of be with my family, and we were thrilled to have her there. But my grandfather was in a wheelchair at this time, and we were in that theater that I mentioned at the museum, and it was very crowded, and he was sitting in the wheelchair, so he was in between everybody's like legs and body parts because everyone else was standing. And Rachel walked into the theater. She kind of caught his eye through the crowd, and she went, "Safe," and Grandpa went, "Out," and she walked over and gave him a big kiss on the cheek. It was like the sweetest thing I've ever seen in my life. So yeah, they were agreeing to disagree about it, but good naturedly for years and years and years.
It's beautiful. Well, that's a great way to finish up our conversation over this past hour. Lindsay Berra, granddaughter of the beloved Hall of Famer Yogi Berra. Lindsay, now a freelance journalist. And make sure you watch the Hall of Fame Connections show on YouTube. New program just dropped earlier today. Lindsay, it's been a real pleasure. We thank you very much for being with us, and best of luck to you in your future endeavors. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you guys so much for having me. Everybody have a great week, and go check out those Hall of Fame Connections episodes and come visit the museum.
Yeah, again, it's the Yogi Berra Yogi Berra Museum and Learning Center, located in Little Falls, New Jersey. It is on the campus of Montclair State University, and it's well worth the visit. I saw it there a number of years ago and really enjoyed having a chance not only to talk about Roberto Clemente, but also to tour the museum as well. Our thanks again to Lindsay Berra and to the Ford Motor Company for making this program necessary, as somebody might have said years ago. Thanks for being with us, everybody. Thanks to all the great questions. Have a great day. Take care.